Welcome to my game room. I wanted to invite you to come in and to watch Tucker Carlson interview JFK Jr. and Larry Elder. And they're going to talk about the latest assassination attempt. I have friends that I think about that I would love for them that are all over the world that could just come in and sit down and watch this with me, and we could discuss it. So I'm inviting you to do that, to come into my game room. I started the way to the Truth Cast because I realized some of my friends were getting their news from Channel One News or from CNN, MSNBC, Spectrum News, ABC, NBC, CBS, even Fox News has become woke and does not any longer give you the truth. So it's very difficult to find where to get you the truth. And I think these three individuals have a lot of truth. I don't always agree with JFK on Jr. on a lot of things, environmental issues, but by and large, I mean, I want to preserve my hunting woods, my rabbit sanctuaries in my yard, and we. So I'm going to get out of the way, and we're going to start watching Tucker Carlson's interview of JFK Jr. And Larry Elder. So with that, here is our presentation. You turn up the volume a little bit. Sorry, I forgot to do that. Oh, get you something to drink, water. Get you some popcorn, something to eat.
Thank you.
I did. Sit back and enjoy yourself.
It's so funny. I was just in this building in July. I had no idea it was the same building until I was pulling up tonight. I was like, oh, it's very familiar. I'm so grateful to be here. I am, actually. And I just want to be clear, I like every part of the United States. I'm from here. I was born here. I will die here. Hopefully not too soon. But I've made that commitment. And I'm going to be buried near my dogs. But I love the whole country. I grew up on one coast. I live on the other. Whoever clapped for me being buried next to my dogs, I like you. Because I feel that way. But I have to say, and this is not pandering, this is totally sincere, I especially love this part of the Midwest. I just love it. And I love it for incredibly shallow reasons that I'll just about. First of all, I love to hunt and fish here. I love your muskies. I love your grouse. The friends who I go on an annual hunting trip with in 2 weeks, the first thing I'm doing when I get off tour is coming back to Wisconsin. To catch your fish and try to shoot your birds. I probably won't. Don't worry, they're safe. But the real reason I love the Midwest, particularly this part of it, is because I married a girl from this area. And I just love the accent. I think it's hilarious. I've been with her 40 years next week. I met her 40 years ago next week. And when I first started dating her, I thought, I'm sure the accent will sort of lighten up a little bit, over time. It has not at all. It's still a car, which is like a motor vehicle. If I say to my dogs, let's go to the park, they look at me like, what? But if I say the park, bam, they're up. And so I associate that accent with niceness, and particularly nice women. So I'm walking through downtown Milwaukee today, and I hear people speaking in this accent, and I almost want to walk up and introduce myself and be like, oh, it's so nice to meet you. And I thought, maybe, I don't know, maybe get shot doing that. But everyone actually was nice. I just think it's just the sweetest part of the country. So thank you so much. We have it even in my kitchen, the Midwestern sensibility. We're very big on meatloaf in my house, actually. I don't even know if they still serve it here, but in the 70s in the Midwest, everyone ate meatloaf every day, and so we still do. So the reason that, it's funny, the reason that we're doing this tour, this is our 8th night, and we're doing the entire month of September. And the real reason I wanted to do it was I now work on the internet, and before then I worked on television. And the frustrating thing about, the frustrating thing about both of them is, there's a lot of censorship, and now more than ever. And so I just thought to myself, the one thing that you can't censor is a live event. You can really be completely honest because the people are right there. And if you're, in a room full of thousands of people, you can feel, very strong, now I'm revealing I'm from California, but a vibe coming off the people. And it's just wonderful. And people can be as honest as they want, which is extremely honest. And so I thought, I just need to do that after spending all day worried about what YouTube is doing to our videos. I just want to get out and talk to people directly.
That's why I'm
so
doing
after 8
this.
days, I'm thinking, maybe
So
I
that
overstated
you can see them.
Maybe the censorship,
Might
the
take them down.
distortion of the facts, the lying, the massive deception machine I've been a part of for 33 years now in the media, maybe it's not as bad as I thought. And then someone tries to shoot Trump again. I was here, actually the last time someone tried to shoot Trump, I was here in this room. And now I'm back again 2 days after, and I am shocked watching the lying in real time. Shocked. I was it 2 days ago? And all of a sudden we're getting these reports. I call in there and get all the facts, and then I thought, what are they saying in the media about it? So the first thing, if you tuned in, that you learned was that he was shot by a Trump supporter, which totally makes sense. The guy loved him so much, he brought a rifle to the golf course and tried to murder him. I mean, that's kind of the way it works. It's like Putin blowing up his own natural gas pipeline. That makes sense. Totally. He's so evil, he's attacking himself. Right. Self-harm, like sort of the natural. And I'm watching this. They're literally telling me that this guy, whom they've arrested, is a Trump supporter. Huh? So you flip channels, and then you learn that I flipped over to a channel I used to work on. And there's Lindsey Graham. And I know. He's a Republican senator from one of the most conservative states. How does that happen, by the way? If democracy is real, how is Lindsey Graham a senator? But whatever. So I'm watching Lindsey Graham, and Lindsey Graham's looking right into the camera. He's like, you know who did this? Iran. So I look into this. Yeah, that's for sure. Well, it turns out someone is a warmonger. Well, the guy who shot Trump was also a warmonger. And in fact, the closer you look at it, the more you realize his politics are exactly the same as Lindsey Graham's. He's a neocon. He literally volunteered in Ukraine. And Lindsey Graham's like, no, Iran did. It's like, no, you have no opinions that are different from this guy's. And you're lying to me. And the audience I used to speak to 5 nights a week, you were lying to them. I'm shouting this in my hotel room. Nobody heard me. My wife was brushing her teeth. She's like, what is that?
This is a shout zone. You can shout all you want in my game room.
And there's no mention of the fact that this guy, who by the way has been interviewed by every media outlet in Washington, this guy was like a very famous guy. You may not even know this. There's only really one place to learn any facts at all, and that's Elon Musk's social media app. It's crazy. I don't have a TV at home, so I'm spared most of this. I have no idea what's going on. By the way, I strongly recommend ignorance. If you're looking to stay happy in a moment like this, just know less. Unfortunately, my job requires me to know more, but if you think about it, did God punish Adam and Eve for ignorance? I don't think he did. He punished them for knowledge, so maybe I shouldn't watch cable news. This was my... I don't want to know what they're saying, but this week I've had to pay close attention. And every single thing is a lie, either directly or it's a lie much more prevalent and much more sinister, it's a lie by omission. They're just not telling you the facts. And without belaboring the point, I'm using this as just one example among a countless number of examples where reality is completely distorted and the average person has not only no idea but no way of knowing what the truth is. So the guy who is now in custody for attempted murder against the Republican nominee, the former US President, Donald Trump, that guy has been interviewed countless times by every big media outlet in the United States. He's got, a criminal record the length of your arm, 20 charges, including possession of weapons of mass destruction. The New York Times didn't bother learning any of that before they held him up as a freedom fighter in Ukraine, where he was living. And then the piece describes the contact he's had with members of Congress and their staffs and other US government agencies. You're like, wait a second, that's the same guy who brought a rifle with a scope to a golf course in South Florida to murder Donald Trump, and he's had all these contacts with US government agencies? Like, I don't know what that's about. But I think it's time to find out. No?
Yeah.
Yes. But no one's gonna find out. It's just gonna be memory holding. In a week, it will never have happened. And you'll be the crazy person for remembering. People are like, what? Didn't some Trump supporter bring a rifle because you're against gun control or something? It's like, no. That's not what happened. A guy who was a darling of the New York Times, who has the exact same worldview as Lindsey Graham, decided to try and murder Donald Trump, and it'll be completely gone. It will have disappeared. And so I guess what I would say is that it's of vital importance to get unfiltered information from honest people. Now, how do you know honest people? How do you know if someone is being honest? It's very hard. But one of the main reasons you know, I don't know what you're saying, but I know that I agree with you. If I could hear you, I would shout back whatever you're shouting, because I feel like you're on. From the pitch of your voice, I can tell you're on to something. Well, I love you too, I heard that. So here's the answer to the question. How do you know if someone is telling the truth? And this has been my obsession for the last year, having worked in the middle of the deception machine and not even realizing it. Until the day you get fired, you're like, what was it like having an alcoholic spouse? Everyone knows, except you. So I'm very fascinated
I didn't like watching Hannity
on this
because
fact,
he had
which is that almost all of the information that we received has been curated and spun and reduced in size. Relevant facts have been omitted, irrelevant facts have been pushed to the fore in order to manipulate how we feel. And so how do you defeat that? Well, one of the main way that you defeat that, your first line of defense, are your instincts. I've come to believe this. You know when someone's lying. You can feel it. And I know this because I have so many dogs. No, I'm serious. My dogs cannot speak English that I'm aware of. And yet, if you come to my house and you're weird, my dogs know immediately. They can smell weirdness on you. They can smell deception on you. They don't like you at all. They will bark at you. They will cower in the corner. Now, how is that? They haven't seen your tax returns. They haven't talked to your wife, but they know. And they know because we all know. If you get a vibe off someone that suggests deception, that person is lying. If you get a vibe that suggests weirdness, Tim Walz, for example. I'm just saying. Oh. First of all, I went to boarding school in the 80s in New England, okay? We had dorm masters like Mr. Walz. Okay. The second I saw that guy, he's not babysitting in my house. I'm sorry, no way. Oh, that's so unfair. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because my instincts didn't just alert me to this, they screamed at full volume. This guy's a creeper, period. Therefore, I don't have the evidence necessary to indict in a court of law. I don't. I'm not going to press charges against Tim Walz. Someone may at some point. It's not going to be me. Because I don't have the information. I have the instinct, and that's all I need. And the same is true, very true, for deception. And if you're watching someone, I don't want to name names because I don't want to be mean, Lindsey Graham, and you look at that person, and you're like, I think that person's trying to sell me something. I think that person may not be telling the full truth. You are right. You are right. Our main weakness as people is that we override the truth as delivered by our instincts, by our higher mind, and we talk ourselves out of knowing what we already know. You already know. And you know because God gave you those instincts as maybe the most important gift you received at birth to protect you from deception and harm. Your instincts are not trying to sell you something. They're not trying to get elected to anything. Their only job is to serve you, so do not ignore them. You know lying when you hear it. I felt this during COVID. I don't think I passed high school biology. Pretty sure I didn't. I may have gotten the answers on the test from my then girlfriend, now my wife. Actually, I did. I'll just be honest. I did. I cheated. Okay, I did. I've never admitted that to anyone. Don't tell my children, but that's true. I just didn't understand it. And so I cannot pretend to be grounded in the hard sciences because I'm not. I'm deeply grounded in human nature and in the way that people communicate because that is my job. And when they started telling me things on television, I knew instantly they were lying. I had no idea why. I didn't know what the larger purpose was. I still have no idea. I can speculate. I won't do it here. What was that? What was the point of that? Well, to increase their power, to make weed stores more profitable and close down churches. Yeah, I got that. But what was the big picture goal of that? I don't know. But I knew the first day when I watched Tony Fauci talk on my show, I interviewed him. I had no idea Tony Fauci was lying. I booked Tony Fauci. Tony Fauci is like the longest serving federal employee. He lives in my neighborhood in DC. Yeah, lock him up. Well, he's not locked up. He's wandering through our dog park with Secret Service protection at your expense, by the way. Do you have Secret Service protection? Yeah, no. He hasn't been locked up. He's been rewarded, and Georgetown University's paying him even more money in federal tax dollars as a hero. But I, on the basis of no evidence whatsoever, only unerring instinct, saw Tony Fauci in that interview, and I was like, you're lying. I didn't say that on TV, but I felt it so strongly, and I spent the next week trying to figure out what he was lying about, and then it became really obvious. All of us are capable of that. Every one of us is capable of that. And the truth, by contrast, hits very differently. When you hear somebody tell a true thing, say something out loud, something you never heard before, something you've heard a million times but never thought about. When you hear a true word, it resonates within you like a tuning fork. It hums. You can't get it out of your head. You may not know why it's true, but you know that it is. The word, the true word, is the most powerful force in the world. In the beginning was the Word. And when we hear something true, we know it. And the only reason that we don't act on it is because we've been talked out of it by professional liars, or we doubt our own gut instincts about it. And so what I would say to you is, do not doubt your instincts. If you see Carmela Harris up there saying, vote for me, I'm actually a farmer from downstate Illinois. You can see the black earth in my hand. That's my tractor behind me. Vote for me, I'll give you a tax cut and a free AR-15. Or whatever, she's basically making that pitch. She's running as some kind of right-winger. Have you noticed this? Yeah, the defund the police chick is somehow now a conservative? Right, okay, got it. I don't even need to know her history. I don't need to know anything about her. I listen to her talk and I think, you're lying. And this is before I even know that she was, Montel Williams' side piece or whatever. I know nothing about her. That's just verification of what I already felt. I knew that without even calling Montel and asking him. I knew who you were. And we all do. So I would say, hone your spidey senses these next 6 weeks. Because you're going to be lied to at a volume with a level of aggression you've never seen before. And the command will always be the same. Ignore what's right in front of your face. You didn't see that. That's not real. You're crazy. That's really the message. You're crazy. You can only trust us. The rest is disinformation. Okay. First of all, anyone who uses the phrase disinformation is a liar. Period. We're done. Disinformation is not a category. There's only one category: truth or falsehood. That's it. Disinformation is another way of saying you're saying something that's inconvenient to me. You are criticizing me. I don't like what you're saying. Shut up or go to jail. That's not a valid category. That's totalitarianism. That's tyranny. So anyone who uses the word disinformation is immediately on the liar's side. Don't listen to another word. That person is your enemy. Listen only to people who care about the only thing that is worth caring about, which is it true or not? Is it actually true? And the people who care about whether it's true are your guides through a dark time, and they're your only guides, and there are not many of them. And I just want to say I'm so grateful that we have two of them tonight. I'm going to introduce them in order. So the first, who's going to join me in just a second, is my friend Larry Elder, who I've known for a really long time. He's a wonderful man. And of the many things that we have in common, Larry Elder and I are both from Southern California, which used to be the kind of thing that, you bragged about. Now I tell everyone I'm from Sheboygan. No one believes me, but I tell them that. Actually, Waukesha, but whatever. But it used to be, I'm 55, when I was a kid, we felt very sorry for anybody who was not from Southern California. You wouldn't say it right to their face because you didn't want to be mean, but we just thought they were deeply, deeply unfortunate. They just didn't know, or they couldn't afford the bus fare or whatever. But if you didn't live in Southern California, we were sad for you because it was such a wonderful place. It was the greatest place. It was the apogee of human civilization, and I still think that. And it matters what's happened to California, and I find myself, since I live as far from California as you can possibly live in the state of Maine now, it's like a distant fact to me. It's like a typhoon in Bangladesh. Like, I feel sad, but it doesn't really affect me. But it actually does affect me. It's our largest state, actually, and it is a bellwether. What happens in California does tend to move east inexorably, and so we have to care. And what is happening in California? Well, I can promise you, the entire American news media colludes to hide the truth of what's happening in California from you because they don't want you to know what they want to do to you, is the truth. And Larry Elder knows. He cares enough to have run for the governorship of California. He's probably the last sensible person who ever will. It's a one-party state. But he made an honorable and good faith effort to dislodge Gavin Newsom. Some of us were really rooting for him. I had him on for his announcement one Thursday night, and the next night was my last show because I got fired, so I wasn't able to cheer him on from my perch at a TV channel, but I was certainly from the sidelines. So Larry Elder's going to come out in about 30 seconds and tell us what the state's actually like, because you should know, even if you live here in the beautiful, unchanged Midwest. And the second person we're going to talk to is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And the one thing I would say about Bobby, who I've been friendly with and really admired for a long time, before it was even cool, I had some secret opinions about pharma that I didn't want to share in public since they were our biggest advertiser. But I have for many years thought he was on the scent. Like one of my dogs hunting down a pheasant in a corn row. I was like, yeah, you're getting warmer there, Bobby. But Bobby's life is amazing. I could go on for hours. I'll do it in one sentence. What's happened to Bobby Kennedy over the last 18 months gives me hope for this country, because there's no one who's more of a Democrat than Bobby Kennedy. He's now campaigning for Donald Trump. How did that happen? And it happened because partisan politics, I'm just learning this in my advanced middle age, is a lie, actually. So if you wake up in a world where Lindsey Graham goes on cable news and pretends that he's on your side as he's lying right to your face to send your children to go die in some pointless foreign war, And Bobby Kennedy is actually trying to save your children from dying young from preventable disease. And if you're like me, you've never voted for a Democrat in your life and you never are going to, but you ask yourself, like, wait a second, maybe this is all fake, actually. And it is. The real divide is not between Republicans and Democrats. The real divide is between liars and people brave enough to tell the truth. And Bobby Kennedy's in the latter category, as you're about to find out. So with that, I am honored to introduce, for an update on the biggest, most important state, the Golden State of California, my friend, Larry Elder. Larry Elder, I'm so honored you're here.
Are you aware that Tucker does not wear socks?
I don't wear socks, no I don't. You get to a certain age and you're like, you know, I still pay my taxes and get a driver's license, but there's some things I'm not doing.
I don't want to know what else you don't wear.
I'm in a commando unit, let me just say that. Excuse me, I beg your pardon. Oof, doesn't take much for me to get right to the vulgar newsroom and deep inside me. So, Larry, you, as I said, I got fired right after you announced.
Right, I killed your show.
You did.
I came on this show on Thursday and I announced I was running for president. By the way, this is kind of the scene of the crime for me. You had the first GOP debate here in Milwaukee, and I was required to get 3 polls where I was at 1% or better to qualify. So I turned in 3 polls where I had 1% or better. I get a phone call from Ronna McDaniel, and she said, one of the polls you can't use. I said, which one? She said, Rasmussen. I said, why? She said, because it's affiliated with the Trump campaign. It is true that the rules are, if anybody commissions a poll, that person can't use it, nor can any other candidate use it. So after the announcement was made that Elder didn't qualify, Rasmussen puts out a tweet and says, we're not affiliated with Trump. There's no reason why Elder can't use me. So I submitted a 4th one, and she said, you submitted it too late. So my lawyer is the former chair of the Federal Election Commission, Tucker, and he told me that by failing to apply the debate criteria fairly to Elder, what the RNC did essentially was to give an in-kind contribution to the 8 candidates who did make it on the debate stage, and based on the value of the time at Fox News, that's $100 million. So I told them, I flew here to Milwaukee anyway, on the eve of the debate. I said, if you don't put me up there by 2 o'clock, I'm going to file a complaint with the FEC for $100 million. And tick, 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 I thought they were going to blink, they did not. So they didn't put me on, as you know, and I have filed that complaint. So we'll find out what happens.
Well, so I guess my takeaway would be, are you saying the RNC is not totally on the level?
Shockingly. I think their goal, Tucker, was to reduce the number of candidates. They thought that 17 was too many in 2016. They wanted to reduce it to a more manageable number, I guess. I don't really know. And Tucker, I wasn't trying to displace Donald Trump. I knew he was going to be the nominee, but there are some issues I thought were not talked about, and I felt if I could get those issues front and center, I'd do my job. Most notably, the #1 domestic problem in America, by far, is the epidemic of fatherlessness. 40% of all American kids now enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother. 25% of black kids in 1965, now 70%. 25% of white kids now enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother, and the stats are clear. If you're raised without a father, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Now what's happened? In the mid-60s, a Democrat, Lyndon Johnson, launched the so-called war on poverty, and since then we've incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility, and nobody's talking about it.
So, the neighborhood you grew up in, the state you grew up in, you grew up with your dad at home. We've talked about your dad. It sounds like an amazing guy. But that wasn't weird, was it?
It was unusual when I was growing up for a mother and a father not to be in the home. Now it is unusual for a mother and a father in the inner city to be in the home. And that's the big difference. My father never knew his biological father. My last name, Elder, is the name of some man who was in his life the longest, maybe 3-4 years. I'm not even sure that Elder formally adopted my dad, but my dad began using his name. His mother could neither read nor write. She was irresponsible, lived off a series of boyfriends. My dad, at the age of 13, comes home and starts quarreling with his mom's then boyfriend. Elder was long gone. And the mother sided with the boyfriend and threw my father out of the house, never to return. Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow South at the beginning of the Great Depression. And my father picked up trash, cleaned up barns, did whatever he could, became a Pullman porter on the train. They were the largest private employer of blacks in those days. And this little black boy from Athens, Georgia, traveled all over the country, Tucker, and came to this state called California, the city called Los Angeles, and my dad was blown away. You could walk through the front door of a restaurant, sit down and get served. So he made a mental note, maybe someday he'll relocate to California. My dad always had packages of crackers and tin cans of tuna because you never knew in the South if you'd be able to get a meal. Pearl Harbor, my dad joined the Marines. I asked him why. Are there any Marines here? Are there any Marines here? Hoorah. You know what I'm going to say? I asked my dad why he joined the Marines. He said 2 reasons. They go where the action is, and I love the uniforms.
Good reason.
So my dad was stationed on the island of Guam. He was in charge of cooking for the colored soldiers because the military was segregated in those days. My dad can look at a cake and tell you what's in it. So the war is over. He goes back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he met and married my mom to get him a job as a short order cook. He goes to 3 or 4 restaurants and he's told, we don't hire niggers. Goes to an unemployment office. The lady says, you went through the wrong door. My dad goes to the hall and sees colored only, goes through that door to the very same lady who sent him out. My dad came home to my mom and said, this is BS. I'm going to LA where I was before the war, get me a job as a cook. So he comes out to LA, he walks around, and he's told, you don't have any references. My dad said, I need references to make ham and eggs. Goes to the unemployment office, this time just one door. Nothing's available. He said, what time do you open? She says, 9 o'clock. What time do you close? She said, 5. My dad said, I'll be sitting in that chair until you find something. Sat in the chair for a whole day, came back the next day, sat there until lunch. She called him up. She said, I have a job for you. I don't know whether you're going to want it. My dad said, of course I'm going to want it. I'm starting a family. What is it? It's a job cleaning toilets and the Biscoe brand bread. My dad did that for 10 years, took a second full-time job at another bread company, cleaning toilets, cooked for a family in the weekend because they wanted my mom to be a stay-at-home mom, went to night school to get his GED. After getting his GED, went to night school to learn how to operate a restaurant. The man never slept. Which is why he was so grouchy all the time. And my dad started a little cafe, 47 years old, ran until his mid-80s. My dad retired. He owned that building. He owned the property next to it, plus the house is still in our family right now. He retired with a net worth of above $1 million. So I tell you that story, Tucker, to say that being raised by a single mom is not a death sentence. You're still responsible. Life is still all about choices. My dad was a lifelong Republican. My mom was a lifelong Democrat. You should have been in the House. My dad said, Democrats want to give you something for nothing. You try and get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something. And my dad would say this, hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You cannot control the outcome, Larry, but you are 100% in control of the effort. Before you bitch, moan, or whine about what somebody did to you or said to you, go to the mirror, look at it, and ask yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, he said, no matter how hard you work, how good you are, sooner or later, bad things are going to happen. How you deal with those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man.
He sounds like an amazing man, but he never made the sale politically with your mom.
No. Lived to be 95 years old. During Watergate, you should have been a fly on the wall. My dad thought Watergate was inconsequential. Even if Nixon sent the plumbers in there to bug Larry O'Brien's office, my dad thought it was, so what? No evidence whatsoever that Nixon did it. He covered it up. My dad thought it was inconsequential. He said, over time, you're going to realize this is no reason to get rid of the president. My mom thought it was horrific. She hated Nixon. The polls now show most people believe that what Nixon did not rise to the level of him leaving office. My dad was right.
Well, it turned out that Deep Throat was the #2 man at the FBI working in concert with the CIA, crush a sitting president. So
And you
something
consider
we've seen subsequently, but your dad was onto that.
You graded on the curve now. Look at the Biden crime family, $27 million, all this corruption. What Nixon did was a inconsequential compared to what's going on right now.
He didn't get rich in China, that's true.
No, he sure didn't.
California, your home state, my home state, give us a status report from the left coast, if you would.
I think this story probably illustrates how bad things are. I ran for governor, as Tucker pointed out. I ran in a recall election. It was a two-part deal. The first part is, do you want this man recalled? And 50% plus one that said yes. Whoever got the most votes on the replacement side would have become governor. I got 49% of the votes on the replacement side. The next highest person got 9%. The 49% was exactly the same percentage that Schwarzenegger got in 2003 when he successfully recalled a previous governor. Since then, there are 5% more registered Democrats, 25% fewer registered Republicans, and 50% more registered independents, and independents in California vote Democrat. There hasn't been a Republican elected statewide in California in 20 years. So the race is over. I raised $27 million in 8 weeks, 3.5 million votes. California has 58 counties. On the replacement side, I carried 57 to 58 counties. The only one I didn't carry was San Francisco. I didn't spend one dime or 1 minute campaigning there because I thought it was a lost cause. I lost that by 149 votes. So the race is over, Tucker. I go to a restaurant on the west side of LA to meet a buddy of mine. He's late. So I'm sitting at a table. There's a table next to me with two ladies. I think they feel sorry for me because I'm sitting by myself. We start talking. Turns out they're 85 years old. They've known each other since the second grade. One was celebrating her 85th birthday. And they told me they were Jewish. One said she was a human rights activist. One said she was a psychotherapist. And then about 15, 20 minutes into the conversation, one of them said, wait a minute, I know you. You're that guy that ran for governor. You're that Larry Elder. She said, guess who we voted for? I said, you didn't vote for me. She said, how do you know that? I said, let's see. We're on the west side of LA. You're both Jewish. You're a human rights activist. It doesn't take Colombo to put that together. You didn't vote for me. And they said, we didn't. Let me ask you something. How do you feel about the way Gavin Newsom shut down the state in a more severe way than did any other governor because of COVID? While sitting up there at that French Laundry restaurant, yucking it up with the very same people that drafted the mandates, not wearing a mask, not social distancing. They said we were outraged by that. How do you feel about the fact that 1 million people have left California in the last 3 years, the first time anybody's left the state in 150 years? We've lost friends. How do you feel about the homelessness? They both told me that they had a homeless encampment near their homes, and they were outraged by it. I said, how do you feel about the quality of schools? Do you have kids? Yes. Did you put any of your kids in the Los Angeles Unified School District? No, we would not, because the schools are substandard. So here we are completing each other's sentences, and you didn't vote for me. I said, have you ever had a conversation with a conservative Republican before? They said no. She said, what are you drinking? I said, double vodka, splash of cranberry. Other one said, what are you eating? I said, well, I was going to have steak, now I'm going to upgrade it to lobster. You pay for the meal. So we had a marvelous time. They had never had a conversation. Another one, I have some back issues, and so a buddy of mine recommended a massage therapist. So give me an address. I'm assuming it's going to be some office building. I turn down a residential street. It's a house. I knock on the door. Lady opens up door. She's got tattoos everywhere, ear piercings everywhere but her eyeballs. I smell this big flume of marijuana. Not that I would know what that smells like, of course. I've read about it. So she's working on my back and she's playing Motown music, which is my favorite genre of popular music. And you name the song, I can tell you about it. They played My Girl. That was written by Smokey Robinson. He wrote the song for David Ruffin, the lead singer of the Temptations. This song was written by Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye was trying to dissuade it from doing that What's Going On album by Berry Gordy because he wanted to control it. I went over every single, and she said, I know who you are. When you contacted me to make your appointment, I knew who you were. I wasn't going to say anything. Had I known you were this funny and this personable, I would have voted for you. I said, do you know any Republicans? She said, no. I said, none? She said, no. I said, news bulletin. We have personalities. We have senses of humor. I mean, honestly.
Well, I mean, in her defense, I remember that campaign very well, and I think the LA Times called you a white supremacist.
No.
Maybe she thought you were a white supremacist. I don't know.
Let's be accurate. I was called the black face of white supremacy.
Sorry.
I worked very hard for that title, Tucker.
What does that even mean? I never figured. That's like a Zen cone. That's the sound of one hand clapping. thing. I don't even understand it.
I've been on radio for 30 years. And the first 6 months I was on radio, every third caller called me an Uncle Tom or a sellout or a bootlicker, bug-eyed bootlicking Uncle Tom, Sambo Tom. So I'm on the radio for about 6 months, and I walk into a restaurant, and there are a couple of brothers sitting on a brick wall. Based on the way they were dressed, they weren't investment bankers. And one of them said, "Larry Elder, I hate you, and I love you. Come on over here." Now, Tucker, I'm thinking if they were going to shoot me, they'd have done it by now. I can't outrun a bullet, might as well go over there. So I went over, he goes, "You know, I've been listening to you about 4 or 5 months now. And at first I couldn't stand your black ass. But the more I started listening to you, more I said, he ain't doing nothing but telling people to get off their ass and stop complaining. You're like castor oil. It don't taste good going down, but it's good for you. Keep it up."
That's such a great description.
All I'm doing is telling the truth. You mentioned truth. George Floyd, 4 months worth of protests, violent protests, 25 people killed, 2,000 police officers wounded, $2 billion in insured property damage, maybe another $1 billion or $2 in uninsured property damage, Tucker. All because of what happened to George Floyd. However you feel about what happened to George Floyd, however you feel about what Derek Chauvin did or didn't do, there is zero evidence that what happened to George Floyd had anything whatever to do with his race. Zero. The lead prosecutor was a black man. And I'm a lawyer. The most important part of the trial is the opening statement. And in the opening statement, he took pains to say the police in general were not on trial. The Minneapolis PD in general was not on trial. This individual was on trial for what he did or what he didn't do to George Floyd. And he never even intimated that the officer committed a hate crime. He was never charged with a hate crime. Yet you had all of these protests all over the country based upon the assumption that what happened to George Floyd had to do with his race, when there was zero evidence of it. The police kill more whites every year than blacks. They kill more unarmed whites every year than blacks. Most people couldn't name an unarmed white person because nobody cares. If an unarmed white person gets killed, as my mother puts it, he's just a dead fly. But an unarmed black person gets killed, in comes CNN, in comes the New York Times, they make a big deal out of it without any understanding whatsoever what's really going on. It's been studied for decades. The police are more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black person than a white person. By far. It's a lie. There's a website called policemag.com. And they asked self-described, very liberal people, how many unarmed black men did the police kill in 2019? 50% of the self-described unarmed black people thought 50% of the self-described liberals thought the police killed 1,000 unarmed black men in 2019. 8% thought they killed 10,000. What you ask about the regular liberal people, self-described, 39% of self-described liberal people thought the police killed 1,000 unarmed black men in 2019. 5% thought they killed 10,000. The answer, according to the Washington Post database, was 12. 12. That's the gap between what the left thinks is going on versus what is really going on, which accounts for why we had 4 months of protests in the streets of America in 2020.
So the numbers you just cited are publicly available. They were right there.
Right there.
But no one cited them except you and a few other people. So this is my last question and most important question before I bring Bobby Kennedy up. What advice would you give to the people in this room, since you are in that 1/100th of 1% of the population who says what he really thinks? How would you encourage people to have heart to do the same? What makes you different? Why are you able to just go on the website, see that it's incorrect, and just say it in public when most people are afraid to do that?
It's what you said in your monologue. Think for yourself. Use your own judgment. Be skeptical. Ingest the news in a discriminating way. The Media Research Center found that ABC, NBC, CBS, 85% of their coverage was positive regarding Kamala Harris and Walz. 93% of it was negative regarding Trump and Vance. And ABC News was the worst. Of 25 stories they've done since Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee, 100% have been positive. 93% of the ones for Donald Trump have been negative. And ABC alone from CBS, NBC, is the only one of those three that has never referred to Kamala Harris as a liberal or even a progressive. You're being lied to. Use your own common sense, use your own judgment, and thank goodness for alternative sources of news like Tucker, like a Glenn Beck.
Think for yourself. It's not that hard.
That's not that hard.
Larry Elder, you're a hero.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, as noted at the outset, I would like to ask this man to join us. Bobby, thank you for doing this. It's an So I hate to ask you this because it's almost too sensitive, but it just happened, and so I can't not ask you. There was appears to be a second assassination attempt on Donald Trump in just a couple months. What do you make of this?
I don't know what to make. I mean, I think we're seeing an impact, at least partially. I mean, I don't know I just don't know enough about what's happened, and I've been reading some of the internet stuff about the connections that this man may or may not have had to the intelligence agencies, etc. But I don't know what to make of it. I do know that there's an antagonism and a violence in our society now that I feel is orchestrated. I feel that we're living in a and you remember a couple of years ago when they had the Occupy Wall Street movement, and they were trying to frame this debate as the 99% against the 1%. And I feel like since then, we've all been turned against each other, where it's 50% against 50%. And that, when the king and queen go out on the balustrades of their castle, and they look out across their people, and they're all fighting each other, they go back to the banquet hall and they pop champagne corks, because they know nobody's coming over the wall against them. And
boy, is that true.
And I think, so many of I announced my campaign almost 18 months ago. And what I said at that point is I'm not going to feed into the vitriol, the anger, the name calling, the demonization of my opponents. I'm going to be civil to all of them. And I'm going to try to identify values that all of Americans have in common, rather than focusing on these smaller issues that are used, the kind of cultural issues that are used to keep us all at each other's throats. Because I've watched what's happening in this country, and there's all these systems that have been put in place to shift wealth and power upwards, to clamp down totalitarian controls on the rest of us. And they all kind of culminated during COVID, where we saw all of our 3.3 million businesses shut down with no due process, no just compensation. $4.3 trillion shifted from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. We created during 500 days, 500 new billionaires were created in 500 days of the lockdown. And the American middle class has essentially been obliterated in this country. And I think and all this money is being shifted up to BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard and the other big financial houses and big pharma and big tech and big ag and big food that are strip mining the American public of wealth, sucking it upward, and leaving nothing below. And the way that they keep that system in place, that they keep us from doing anything about it, is to keep us all hating on each other. And
one of the things that I admire about you is that you have more children than I do, which is not that easy. You have a lot of children, and you have made your campaign about them, which used to be a pretty conventional thing. Politicians would run on children, help the children, save the children, the next generation. You're one of the very few people who still talks like that. Explain, if you would, because I think you're sincere when you talk about it, how children, your children, and other people's children, mine, have inspired you to stay in politics when you could have just gone away, gone back to LA.
how my kids inspired me to do that. Let me finish the thought that I think I left incomplete on that last question. I think the anger that we have at each other also turns into violence. And, when my uncle was running for president, when my uncle was president in 1963, there was a tremendous anger that was coming out of the civil rights movement and other things that he was doing, shutting down the war against Castro and the war against Russia. There was tremendous anger and poison. When he landed in Dallas on November 22nd, there was a full-page ad in the big newspaper in Dallas saying "Wanted Dead or Alive," and with a picture of my uncle on it. And there were posters all over the street that day. And there was, my uncle was clearly killed by the CIA, but there was also an anger that had been sown across the American landscapes at that time that I think, contributed to this atmosphere of violence that led to his death, Martin Luther King's death, my father's death 5 years later, and all the other assassinations that we saw during the 1960s. So I just wanted to complete that thought.
But that was over 60 years ago, and that institution, those files are still classified, as you well know, better than most, and those institutions remain intact. And except for one series of hearings in 1975, there's been no meaningful effort to reform them. And you sort of wonder, at what point do we learn the truth about everything federal agencies have done with our money in our name, and at what point are they reformed?
Yeah, I think it's really, there's an act called the JFK Assassination Papers Act that requires all those documents be released to the American public by 2018, all the documents pertaining to my uncle's death. And President Trump, when he ran the first time in 2016, promised to release them, and then he didn't, which always struck me as odd. And then President Biden ran promising to release them, and he didn't. I had the opportunity recently to ask President Trump directly why he did not release them. And he said that Mike Pompeo called him and said, please do not let me make me release these. It's going to be a calamity for our country. President Trump says he's going to release them, and I believe that he will.
So can I ask, why would Mike Pompeo, who I don't think was even born or had just been born when your uncle was murdered, why would he have an interest in keeping those documents secret?
Well, clearly it's not to protect any individual, because virtually all the individuals who were directly involved in my uncle's death, and many are now dead, and many of those have, gave deathbed confessions or gave confessions of various kinds before they died. But I think the only supposition that is rational is that it's about protecting an institution. And I think, in the last tranche of documents that were released, and the New York Times even reported this, which in the Times has been one of the major bulwarks against conspiracy theories that depart from the single shooter Lee Harvey Oswald killed John Kennedy. they've been the big bulwark against that. So it's extraordinary that they finally reported that Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA asset, and that the CIA went to great lengths to conceal that, not only from the Warren Commission, and as most of you probably know, Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, who my uncle fired after the Bay of Pigs, and then come back into public life to get himself appointed to the Warren Commission. And he was really the only commissioner that was there for every meeting. He was the only one that was paying attention. All of the other ones, like Chief Justice Warren was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He had a full-time job. The other ones were congressmen and senators, other well-known individuals who were fully occupied by their work. The only one for whom it was a full-time job was Alan Dulles. And his function was to make sure that any questions about the CIA involvement were quashed. And he concealed the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald had been recruited into the agency in 1957 and 1958 and sent on a mission to Russia, which was a false defection mission, and then brought back to this country. And so the first time, and many of us who've been studying the assassination knew this, but it has never been reported in the mainstream press. And after that last tranche of documents was released 5 years ago, the New York Times finally acknowledged them. And there may be other information related to that they don't want released, but I have no idea what it is.
So what does it take? I mean, you can't have a democracy in a system where the public has no idea what its government is doing, and that's what we have now. So how do you fix that? What would it take to actually bring transparency to the federal agencies?
Yeah, I mean, let me answer that in a second, but to follow up on why this is important for democracy. When I was a kid, it was unthinkable that the United States government would lie to the American public. It was just no American would believe that. And the first time, and we didn't, there'd been this tremendous resistance to starting the CIA in this country. The OSS had been created, which is the first intelligence agency that we had during World War II, but Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, were very, very reluctant to do it because they said secret police agencies are associated with totalitarian states. The Gestapo, the Stasi, Savak in Iran, PEEP in Chile, and the KGB in Russia, and that they're not something that are consistent. They're antithetical to democracies. You can't have them. They're inconsistent with a democracy. Oh, they've been very reluctant to do it, and then in 1948, and so they disbanded the OSS after World War II. And then Truman became convinced that we had one weapon, really, which was the atomic bomb, and he didn't want to use that, and he wanted to be able to fight wars without getting involved in conventional wars. And so they created the CIA to do certain things, to do espionage, which is intelligence gathering in 1948, and Dulles had come in very early and changed the function of the agency to be kind of a paramilitary agency to fix elections, assassinate leaders, and do all the dirty tricks. My uncle fired him, but until when I was a kid, it was just incomprehensible that the U.S. government would lie. The first time Americans had inklings that the government would lie was right in May of 1960, while my uncle was running for president, and a U-2, a secret CIA plane, the U-2 was not Air Force, it was CIA, was shot down over Russia. And the U.S. government, it was a secret program. Those planes flew so high and you could not see them with the naked eye. And nobody in the world knew that we had them. They were flying at 60 or 70,000 feet. And we believed they couldn't be shot down. In fact, there was a mole in Langley in the CIA who had given the plans to the U-2 to the Russians and it allowed them to shoot it down. And when they shot them down, the Russians accused us of violating their airspace. And Allen Dulles told Eisenhower, just lie about it, because there's no way they have proof, and the pilot has committed suicide because they gave him a cyanide shot, and they were under orders to kill themselves. Well, Gary Francis Powers had chickened out, and he had parachuted to the ground, and they had captured him. And the Russians didn't say that at first. They just made the accusation. Eisenhower, at Dulles' advice, went on national TV and told the world, the American public, this is a lie. The Russians are lying. We do not have this program. And then the Russians produced Gary Francis Powers, and Americans for the first time said, oh my God, our president lied to us. And it was shocking. I remember back then. And then when my uncle was killed, and the Warren Commission report came out, and about half the people in this country just said, that's not true. The government's lying, but they were dismissed as conspiracy theorists. And then in 1973, the Pentagon Papers were released, and that was 27 volumes of thousands and thousands of systematic lies. And U.S. government officials, including presidents, had been lying to the American people, and that's when everybody just said, oh, they lie all the time. And then, you know, since then, we've now been convinced, I think most of the people in this room believe that at any time a government official tells you anything, if his lips are moving, he's lying to you.
So why did so many people fall for the COVID lies?
I think that the COVID was I won't say the whole thing was a psyop, but there was a psyop accompanying COVID, and they were manipulating. They were using these, you know, we were hardwired in our reptilian core of our brain to, when we encountered something fearful, to retreat into authorities that are going to protect us. And those buttons were being pushed full time. We were seeing on CNN and the Chirons every 20 minutes the new death counts from COVID. The announcers on TV, and by the way, television and radio and newspapers were calling all of that time when we made that big departure, and the government really started systematically lying to us, which I think began with the Warren Commission report. And that's why I think we have to go back and really get the answers on that to right the ship. But during many of those years, the press was calling government on its lies. But during COVID, they completely stopped. And they were going along with it. And if any of us tried to say, well, wait a minute, you know, like in May of 2020, I said, all the government agencies were saying the vaccines are going to prevent transmissions. And I said on my Instagram account, the monkey studies show that they cannot prevent transmission. I didn't say that because I was guessing it or I was, you know, paranoid. I was reading the monkey studies. And the monkey studies, they had given the vaccines to half the monkeys and they had given a placebo to the other half. And they all got COVID, and they all got the same amount of concentrations in their nasal pharynxes. I reported those studies, which were their studies, and I got thrown off of Instagram and called a conspiracy theorist. Oh, you had all the press, and then, as you know, for the next year, they were telling us, you got to get this because it's going to protect grandma, right? You remember when they were telling us that? And they knew it was a lie. And yet all the press went along with it, and everybody else. And I think, you know, most Americans were terrified. I'll tell you, you and I have talked in the past about the CIA program called MK Ultra. So the CIA during the 1950s and 1960s developed all of these programs to do social controls, to control individuals and populations. They were trying to develop, for example, Manchurian candidates, an unwilling assassin, using hypnosis, using psychedelic drugs, using torture, using isolation, sensory deprivation, all kinds of methods that they were exploring, not only for manipulating individuals, but manipulating entire populations. How do you get populations to comply? And that group of studies was called MK Naomi, MK Dietrich, MK Ultra. MK stands for mind control. And that's what they were looking for, ways to control people's minds and perceptions. And one of the studies that they funded was a study called the Milgram experiment that took place at Yale. And it was a young associate professor named Stanley Milgram. And he brought about 70 subjects into this experiment. They were from every walk of life. They were black and white, they were students, they were professors, they were business people from the community, every kind of person. And he would sit the subject at a table, and there was a person in the next room who was invisible to them, but they could hear. They said, they were told that person is strapped to a chair, and that he will be given an electric shock when you twist his dial. The subject would be told to twist the dial. Dr. Milgram was there with a white lab coat and all these kind of ornaments that bespoke his authority and his trustworthiness. And he would tell them, turn it up, turn it down, turn it up. And when they turned it up, they could hear the person struggling, screaming, pleading. And a lot of the subjects would say to Dr. Milgram, I don't want to do it again. And he would tell them, do it anyway. Some of them began crying because they did not want it to twist it up. And 67% of them turned it up to 250 volts where it was marked potentially lethal. And what Dr. Milgram says, and you can look this up, Milgram experiment on Wikipedia. I wouldn't believe Wikipedia, anything you read in Wikipedia, but this thing is actually true. And 67% turned it up to potentially fatal. And what Milgram concluded was that a figure of authority can persuade people, the average person, 67% of people, to override their most closely and fundamentally held values and do things that they know are totally wrong if they're told to do that by authority. And during the COVID, I felt like we were all involved in a giant Milgram experiment where we had a medical doctor.
Which doctor, to be more specific?
Well, we had Dr. Fauci, we all know, and who was telling us to do things that we knew were wrong. And he knew they were wrong. He would say, 1 week, masks don't work, privately and publicly, and 2 weeks later, everybody put them on. Everybody put 2 of them on. And he would say, he said very publicly that if you get an infectious respiratory illness, you do not need a vaccination. And yet he changed his mind. And he said that the best vaccine you can have is to have the disease. There's nothing better. You'll never beat it. Then he said, even if you've had it, you need to get the shot. So they were telling us things that they knew were wrong, but we were doing it because it was an authority telling us. And it also, there's another phenomenon that anybody who disagrees with that authority becomes the enemy. They become dangerous. They have to be silenced. Now, the good news is that 33% of the people in the Milgram experiment got up and walked out. And
those people in this room right now.
That's the people here right now.
So how do do you break the spell? So I just think the most interesting thing about you, if I can say as an outsider watching carefully, is you don't need to do any of this. You've suffered great personal cost, I would say. Certainly in prestige in the world that you've grown up in, and banned from the New York Times, and people call you crazy, but you do it anyway. So no, but it's true. So, and you've taken a lot of heat from people who are close to you, but you do it anyway. Do you think that telling the truth out loud is enough to break the Milgram experiment spell?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how we break it. Enough people have to say, we're not going to do that. And and when you do it, I mean, there's a couple of rules about totalitarian systems. One is any power that the government takes away from us, it will never relinquish voluntarily. Rule number 2, any power that the government takes from us, it will ultimately abuse to the greatest extent possible. And number 3, nobody ever complied their way out of totalitarianism. You have to resist.
What powers does the government now have that it didn't have 10 years ago?
Well, they have the power now to revoke all of our constitutional rights. So, and that sounds like hyperbole, but think about it. They figured out, the most important right is freedom of speech. And Hamilton, Madison, and Adams said we put that in the First Amendment, freedom of expression, because all the other rights are dependent on it. And I've said this to you before, Tucker, that any government that has the power to silence its critics has license for any atrocity. And they knew that. So they put it first, and we saw this dynamic during COVID. As soon as they realized that they could silence us, that they could censor doctors, they could censor scientists, they could censor individuals who were injured, they could stop them from talking about their injuries, they could stop parents from talking about their children's injuries. They did all these things to us, and we put up with it. And the press went along with it. Very shamefully, they became vehicles, stenographers for government propaganda. And we all went along with it. And then what did they do? They immediately went after the other leg of the First Amendment, was freedom of religion. They closed every church in this country for a year. Can you imagine if somebody told you 5 years ago the government's going to close every church in this country? You would say there's no way that that's going to happen, and yet it happened. And they went after the third leg of the First Amendment, which is freedom of assembly, with these social distancing mandates that had no scientific basis. And they went after the Fifth Amendment, which is property rights. They shut down 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation, no public hearing, no environmental impact statement, no notice and comment rulemaking. All of the procedures that guarantee democracy in the regulatory process were abandoned. And you just had one guy, a 50-year bureaucrat who's never been elected to anything, who says, shut down all your businesses. Shut down the small businesses, but keep Target and Walmart open. And shut down the churches, but keep the liquor stores open. And keep Facebook and all the people who are cooperating with the government, Facebook, Instagram, Google, and who are censoring speech for us, keep all them open. And shut down all the little guys, and and destroy our community. We put up with it. Then they got rid of jury trials. The Seventh Amendment says, no American shall be denied the right of a trial before a jury of his peers in case of controversies exceeding $25 in value. Well, there's no pandemic exception. There's no epidemic exception. And yet they said, shut it down, shut down any corporation, any hospital, any doctor who injured you negligently, recklessly, without, who was involved in applying a countermeasure cannot be sued, no matter how grievous their behavior, no matter how egregious your injury. And for the first time, so these are all, and then the Fourth Amendment guarantees against illegal searches and seizures, was all completely abandoned with these track and trace surveillance measures that we were all subjected to, where you had to give your medical record before you leave your home. So virtually all of the rights in the Constitution, except the Second Amendment, and probably because there is a Second Amendment. That was the only one they didn't mess with. But all the other ones they got rid of. So if you're asking, what's changed, that's what's changed now. They said to us, oh, we're going to give all those back to you. And they did. So today we have those back. But they've established this very, very dangerous precedent where if there's another emergency and, they can cook up a pandemic anytime they want, that's what gain of function is all about. And anytime if there's the monkeypox pandemic or the dengue pandemic or the Ebola pandemic that are all in the pipeline, when those happen, we again are going to be asked to abandon all of our rights, and most people aren't going to put up with it. And yeah, not all people.
So what happens when there is the next emergency, and maybe it's not, maybe it's a war.
Maybe it's a war. Maybe it's an economic collapse.
Well, that's right. So how do we respond when we're told to abandon the Bill of Rights, our birthright? How do we respond?
As I said, we resist. The Constitution was written for hard times. It wasn't written for easy times. It was written for hard times. And I've said this to you before, Tucker, that during the American Revolution, there were two large epidemics. One of them, a malaria epidemic that decimated the armies of Virginia, and then there was a smallpox epidemic that decimated the Army of New England at the very time that Benedict Arnold, who was our greatest general, our greatest military strategist during the war, had captured the city of Montreal and captured Canada. And because of the smallpox epidemic and the American troops, he didn't have the manpower to hold the city and had to withdraw. Otherwise, Canada today would be part of the United States. And the framers of the Constitution knew that. And between the end of the Revolution and 1792, when we ratified the Bill of Rights, in that 10-year period, there were epidemics in every city in our country: malaria epidemic, smallpox, yellow fever, cholera, typhus, typhoid, that killed tens of thousands of people, decimated population. All the framers knew about that, but they did not put an epidemic exception in the United States Constitution. And during the Civil War, the Confederates were sending agents provocateurs northward into U.S. cities to drum up draft riots. And those draft riots were threatening the entire structure of Union society and the military efforts. And Abraham Lincoln, in an effort to avert any more draft riots, began arresting these Confederate agent provocateurs when they came into the northern cities, before they did anything wrong. That was a violation of habeas corpus. But he said, we've got to do it because it's vital for the life of our nation. At that time, over 600,000 Americans had died in the Civil War. And it's the equivalent of 12 to 15 million people dying today. And our country was being torn apart, and we didn't know if it was going to survive. So the life of the nation was at stake. And that case, that his habeas corpus declaration was challenged in the Supreme Court. And Justice Roger Tatey said, you can't do it, even if the life of the nation is at stake. even if tens of thousands of lives are at stake, you can't do it. It's the Constitution. It was written for hard times. There is no circumstance in which it can be waived. And I think that we all have to remember that.
Tucker, can I?
Do you foresee, you said resist, resist, resist. I remember growing up, nonviolent resistance in the name of civil liberties was considered a great virtue, the most American of all virtues. I don't hear that anymore. But is that what you foresee?
I would say, that we all have a duty to do that. We have all a duty to resist in whatever way is going to be most effective in resisting the tyranny. And, and we, right now, Tucker, it's really more important than ever and it's going to take more courage than ever. And it'll probably take, whatever it's going to take more than we've ever given. And the reason for that is because of the emergence of all of these new technologies for surveillance and control. And we all know about them. I mean, the AI, the emergence of AI is going to allow the intelligence agencies, powerful entities, not only to control us, but to warp our vision, our understanding of reality. And we already have it's been the ambition of every totalitarian system in the history of mankind to control every aspect of human behavior, our interactions with each other, our relationships, our communications, our transactions, our movements, the books we read, our letters to each other, communications with each other. Of course, they've never been able to do that, but now they can. They can look at everything. And, you all have had this experience. 2 years ago, my wife and I, in the privacy of our bedroom, were talking about the fact that our mattress was becoming saggy. The next morning, both of us got 3 mattress ads on our cell phones. And that's what brought it home to me that, they're listening to everything we say all the time.
Did you replace the mattress?
I replaced my cell phone.
There you go.
All these devices, you have GPS. A lot of you are wearing GPS watches. We have GPS in our cell phone that is tracking us all the time. We have GPS in our car. There's facial recognition systems. There are now permits issued for 415,000 low-altitude satellites that are going to circle the globe or that are stationary across the globe all the time. Bill Gates' company has 65,000 permits for satellites. He says his company alone is going to be able to look at every square inch of the Earth 24 hours a day. So, and we all have Siri and Alexis in our home. It's very convenient, but Siri is not working for you. Siri is working for Bill Gates and for these companies that are monetizing the data. And every time you cough, every time you sneeze, every time your baby cries, Siri knows it, and that's being logged somewhere. All these communications, our conversations with each other are all being logged. This isn't paranoid. Corporations are doing this because they're mining our data in order to monetize it. But the same companies that are mining our data are also sharing that data with the NSA, and all of it's stored somewhere. And for all the reasons that human beings have been in democracies have been paranoid about government keeping track of their private conversations, of their personal interactions. We need to be worried about that today. And all of these technologies mean that it's going to be very, very difficult for us to hold on to our constitutional rights in the coming decades. And particularly if President Trump loses this election and Kamala Harris wins, I don't think there's any consciousness in the Democratic Party that this is a bad thing. I think the Democratic Party now believes they no longer trust the public. They don't trust the demos. They believe that public needs to be controlled, that the information we get needs to be controlled, it has to be censored, that the big, threat to us is disinformation and misinformation, which is anybody who tells you that is lying to you. Anybody who tells you that is trying to manipulate you.
But
You're a big person. You can make up your own mind about what is true and not true. My kids do it. I say to my kids, look at this this posting on Instagram where, the dog is eating the alligator. And they're like, Dad, you need to fact check that. So everybody knows that you gotta do research, right? And that you don't believe everything you read on the internet. Louis Brandeis, our justice, the Supreme Court justice, said that the remedy for bad information is more information. It's never censorship. Censorship is a way to control.
Bobby, speaking of President Trump, you've endorsed him for a number of reasons, but he did give us Operation Warp Speed. To what degree do you hold him culpable for succumbing to the fear you talked about?
Well, I absolutely hold him culpable, but here's what, and for a lot of other things, that I disagreed with in the first Trump administration. I didn't like seeing Scott Gottlieb cash in at FDA and Alex Azar running HHS, and oil lobbyists running the Interior Department, coal lobbyists running the EPA, telecommunication lobbyists running the FCC, etc. I talked to President Trump at length about this, and he said, look, when I got elected in 2016, I didn't know how to govern, and to tell you the truth, it was kind of surprising that we won the election. And he said, I was immediately inundated by lobbyists and business people, and they were all saying, you point this guy, point that guy, point that guy. And he said, I did it, and I wish I hadn't. And he understands that Scott Gottlieb was cashing in, and he did a $100 billion favor for Pfizer, and then went back to work for Pfizer on his board of directors. And so I think that President Trump has said to me that we're going to do something different this time, and that's why he launched the transition team 5 months before he takes power. The last time he did his transition team, he started in January. He's now launched it. I'm on it. Tulsi's on it. Donald Jr. is on it, and I had an impression that Donald Jr. was kind of a lightweight, but I've gotten to know him, and he's exactly the opposite of that. He's very thoughtful, he's really well informed, and he understands who the bad guys are. He does not like the neocons, he does not like the constant wars. He does not. He wants to restore public health. He loves the environment. He loves the rivers and the streams and the waterways, and he wants to protect those things. And I have nothing but respect for him, and there's a lot of really, really good energy that is part of this transition team now.
So that leads to my. I agree with your assessment of John Jr. completely, and then, as you know, having lived around famous people your whole life, the perceptions of people are sometimes accurate, sometimes are the opposite of what you're told, and he's definitely in that category. How do you envision your role in the Trump administration?
President Trump has asked me specifically to do two things. One, to help unravel the capture of the agencies by corrupt influence. In other words, to drain the swamp. And I I gotta say something about President Trump. President Trump has some extraordinary gifts, and one of them is that he has very, very good instincts. And that when he came out the first time, you remember, he was very against the lockdowns publicly. He was for hydroxychloroquine. He was for alternative medicines. He was against the masks. He was doing, but he was surrounded by bureaucrats who, and knowledgeable experts who, ultimately pushed back on those assumptions and got us into some policies that I think were really bad for our country. He's not going to do that again. And he wanted to end the wars. He said back then, we don't want to go into the Ukraine war. I'd rather make a deal than have a war. So I think that, and he's asked me to do that, and he's asked me to help him end the childhood disease, chronic disease epidemic, and make Americans healthy again.
And if given the power to do that, what'll you do?
That's unclear, because there's no, at this point, thank you. Like I said, I'm on the transition committee, and there's no, we don't have, I don't have a post for myself that's picked out. I know that I'm going to be deeply involved in helping to choose the people who can run FDA and NIH and CDC in a way that restores public health rather than.
Can you imagine if you're at FDA or NIH and Bobby Kennedy all of a sudden? I mean, they must be dying. They must be dying.
But I'll bring in people to run those agencies like Callie Means, like Casey Means. And
You think they're gonna? I mean, they have nightmares about that.
yeah, they should.
Yeah, and they should. Bobby Kennedy, thank you. May they have more nightmares. Larry Elder, thank you very much. The big tech companies censor our content. I hate to tell you that, it's still going on in 2024, but you know what they can't censor? Live events. And that's why we are hitting the road on a fall tour for the entire month of September, coast to coast. We will be in cities across the United States. We'll be in Rosenberg, Texas with Jesse Kelly, Grand Rapids with Kid Rock, Hershey, Pennsylvania with J.D. Vance, Reading, Pennsylvania with Alex Jones, Fort Worth, Texas with Roseanne Barr, Greenville, South Carolina with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Sunrise, Florida with John Rich, Jacksonville, Florida with Donald Trump Jr. You can get tickets at tuckercarlson.com. Hope to see you there.
So you're going to come and watch all those with me? I think Marjorie Taylor Greene will be an interesting one too. But I want to encourage you to like, to subscribe, because as Tucker was talking about, that's the reason I do this, is because YouTube likes to hide our contents, and they like to mess with us, deplatform and do all this kind of crap. They don't like the truth. YouTube is not TruthTube, and so the way to the truth is I've created this so that I can do these with you, and then that hopefully will preserve them maybe for a day or two so people can watch them. And I have after they have been hidden on Tucker Carlson's or taken down or something like that happens, they're preserved. That's one of the things that really irked me whenever Fox fired him, is they took down all of his content. I paid big bucks to be on Fox to be able to see his content, and so to me that was a violation of my user agreement when they took that down. They should have refunded my money. but so that's why that I put this up, is so that if YouTube ever decides to take it down, maybe they'll leave it. Maybe I'm a nobody. Maybe they'll leave it up on mine. With that said, uh, subscribe so you can see any of our hidden content. Subscribe to Tucker, subscribe to me, and everybody else you want to subscribe so you can see what YouTube is hiding from you. Then comment, ask questions. Nobody said anything during this one. Sometimes people come along and talk to me during the live feed, but you're welcome to, after the live feed is over, down below, make comments, and I will discuss those comments on the next Way to the Truth cast. Then share with your friends this channel. I appreciate that. And then hit the notification button so that you can be notified the next time that we do this live, and you can come in and to my humble abode, into my game room, and I never showed it. I never spun it around, let you guys see the rest of my game room. Let's see. You can see we set it up for 4 people can play simultaneously. Me, Braden, LaRonda, and Tim. And so I invite you in to come, and whenever that I can, whenever Tucker does a good a broadcast, I want to share that. I did feel like I took down the one that he did that was controversial, but by and large, I agree with most of what Tucker does. And so, with that, I say that was the news, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help us God, and good night.